What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. Big episode for you this week because we have some news. Friends, big news down at One Patriot Place. The team has signed free agent wide receiver Stefon Diggs, 4-time Pro Bowler, 6-time 1,000-yard receiver in the National Football League. Yes, he'll be 32 in November. Yes, he's coming off a torn ACL, but he is now a member of your New England Patriots. And so we have to talk about what that means for Drake May, what that means for the Patriots receiver room, what it means for Josh McDaniels, why I believe it's a smart signing, and what I'm hearing from folks around the league about this acquisition. We're also going to bring in my good friend John Lyons from WEEI and the New England Football Journal. Love picking John's brain when it comes to all things Patriots. He has thoughts on Diggs, and then we're actually going to play a fun little game where we're going to rank our most impactful, our top 5 most impactful Patriots free agent acquisitions. Where does Diggs rank? What about Morgan Moses? What about Milton Williams? What about Carlton Davis? And boy, oh boy, do our lists differ. And John makes some fantastic arguments as to why certain players rank where he has them. I try to rebut him on a number of those selections and where I have guys slotted, but that was a really fun conversation, so you're going to want to stick around for that. But first, let's talk about Diggs. Let's talk about what I'm hearing. And the first thing that stands out to me is the $26 million guaranteed, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter, that the Patriots will be sending Diggs' way. That was a number one AFC executive told me on Tuesday night. That was higher than everyone thought it would be, which makes sense. And you can say it's an overpay, and you can say it's a bad move because you don't want to commit that much money to someone who is Diggs' age, coming off the injury that Diggs is coming off of, and you'd be right. It is an overpay. However, I would also say this, and let's just add as a side note here, newsflash, the Patriots have to overpay to acquire talent. They struck out on Chris Godwin. They tried to overwhelm him with money. The Patriots believed they had the best offer on the table by a good margin, and they still weren't able to pry him from Tampa Bay. They were interested, as we've talked about on this podcast before, in DK Metcalf. No, they did not make a trade offer to the Seattle Seahawks, but it wasn't for a lack of interest. It was because they had been given indications that DK Metcalf wasn't going to sign a long-term deal with them, and so they couldn't go ahead and execute that kind of trade with Seattle, not having a guarantee from Metcalf that he'd be with them for the long haul. So was Diggs their first option? No. Was he their second option? No. But is he a option who represents a real upgrade for them? Yes. No question about it. Talking to one source in Houston, had the ability to be around him last year, not only raved about his pre-injury performance on the field, he averaged 6 catches per game, about 60 yards per game, a true, solid, high-end, in my opinion, number 2 to Nico Collins, who is the number 1 for the Texans, but also the kind of teammate that Mike Vrabel is going to want in his locker room as he tries to establish something, as he tries to put together this foundation of what he wants his culture to be moving forward in 2025 and beyond in Foxborough. He has a reputation, we know, Diggs does, as being a quote-unquote diva receiver at times. But in Houston, he took guys like Tank Dell and John Mechie under his wing. He practiced hard. He played hard. He got along with everyone. And yes, he's competitive. Yes, he's fiery. Yes, there are reasons why he's no longer in Minnesota. There are reasons why he's no longer in Buffalo. He can be a handful at times. Talking to one coach who worked with him in Minnesota, that's how he described him. Yes, he was a handful at times. But the guy could play. I loved him, this coach told me. And if you're the Patriots, you have to look at this and say to yourselves, on the one hand, you're desperate for receiver help, and if he can get anywhere close to his pre-injury form, he gives you your best player at that position, even at his age. There's no doubt about that. given how that receiver room in New England was constructed for the vast majority of this offseason. But you would rather have a fiery competitor where that occasionally spills over into distraction territory or into negative impact on those around him territory. You'd actually rather have that if you're the Patriots than the opposite, which is, in my opinion, what they did have in that receiver room last year. Not enough fire. Not enough in terms of, what are we doing here? How can I get the most out of my game? How can we elevate this offense to another level? We talked about this on the Patriots Talk podcast earlier today with Tom Curran. Young players who felt as though they had arrived to some degree. Well, now you have someone who has done a ton in this league. One of the most productive players at that position in the NFL over the course of the last decade. And he's going to be an example for them when it comes to work ethic, when it comes to practice habits, when it comes to professionalism. Because even if he might be someone who is in some ways a little too unafraid to share his opinion, you don't turn yourself into the kind of receiver Diggs turned himself into without being wholeheartedly devoted to your craft. You don't turn yourself into the kind of route runner that Stefon Diggs is considered to be without being all in on your job. And the Patriots could use more of that, plain and simple. And so that, to me, is one reason why this is a really smart move for the Patriots, even if it is an overpay. You've got to overpay. That's non-negotiable. Just to get somebody who has the pelts on the wall that Diggs does. But what he might be able to do in terms of elevating that receiver room and elevating the intangible qualities that, in the opinions of those who were on last year's coaching staff, felt as though we're holding that room back. That was a room that was lacking in maturity, that was lacking in professionalism. You would hope, if you're Mike Vrabel and the rest of that Patriots staff, that what Diggs is bringing to the table is going to be that tide that lifts all boats. We'll see if that can happen. We'll see if he can have a positive impact on a Jalen Polk or a Kayshon Boutte. We'll see if he's able to, just his mere presence, allow guys like Kendrick Bourne and Pop Douglas to slot into roles that are more appropriate for them, that are more befitting of their skill sets at this point in time. I think it will. And so that's why I think this is a smart signing. I also think it just gives you someone to help your young quarterback. It gives you a dependable option. Now, again, he has to get on the field, and he has to regain the form that he showed prior to tearing his ACL late in October. And that's a huge condition of this move working out, right? We shouldn't overlook that. He tore his ACL at the end of October. What I'm told, you're talking 9 months, right, at a minimum, before he's getting back on the field, which would put you right up on the precipice of training camp, essentially, if my math is right. Kendrick Bourne tore his ACL basically a year to the day before Diggs did. And he's younger than Diggs. And he didn't see action in a game until week 5. Now, not all ACLs are created equal, and we talk about this with John a little bit later in the podcast. But that's something that we have to keep an eye on. I know the reporting is positive, is he's ahead of schedule, and that's all well and good. Let's see. Okay, he's probably going to miss the spring in terms of the on-field portion of that, in terms of just how much he'll be able to give. And my guess is he's going to start training camp on the physically unable to perform list. If he doesn't, that's great news for the Patriots. But as we sit here today in March, I'm not sure you can write in pen that he's going to be in the starting lineup week 1. I don't know how you could do that. I don't know how anybody knows that. It's a long time between now and then. So we'll have to see how his knee progresses. But if he is on the field, even if he's not the burner he used to be, work the middle of the field. He played over 50% of his snaps in the slot last year for Houston. That's the role that Houston felt fit him best last year. Moved the chains on 31 different first down conversions through just 8 games last year. That was the same number of first down conversions that Pop Douglas, the Patriots leader in that particular category for receivers, same number Pop Douglas had in 17 games last year. So he gives you a dependable set of hands, a nuanced route runner, somebody who understands NFL defenses and understands how to get open, even if the juice isn't quite the same as it was for him in Buffalo or in Minnesota. So now it's Hunter Henry, you feel like is a dependable option. Stefon Diggs, you feel like is a dependable option. Maybe with both those guys on the field, maybe that opens up some space for somebody like Pop Douglas to become a more dependable option moving forward. And if you recall on this podcast, we told you before, Pop Douglas is a player that the rest of the league looks at and says, how are they not able to use that guy more in 2024? And so you would think with Josh McDaniels at the controls, you're going to be able to leverage that skill set, that traditional water bug slot skill set that McDaniels is so familiar with, and get more production out of him. And now there's going to be more attention on Diggs whenever he gets on the field. That maybe can free somebody like Pop Douglas up to be a better player and a more productive and more impactful player in his third season. So this is good news for Drake May. This is, in my opinion, good news for Mike Vrabel and the culture that he's trying to establish in New England. You don't want to let that competitiveness get in the way, as one league source told me, because it can, and it has in the past for him. But you'd rather have it than be on the opposite end of the spectrum. Check mark for May. Check mark for the culture. Check mark for allowing that receiver room to settle in terms of the individuals settling into the roles they should be in moving forward. Now, does that mean there's an odd man out? Could be. Javon Baker, is there space for him at this point? Because you're going to have Stefon Diggs. You're going to have Kendrick Bourne, who's had success with Josh McDaniels in the past, and I think the Patriots are excited to get to work with Bourne again this coming year. You're going to have Pop Douglas, who in some ways might be your most physically gifted receiver, and you're going to have Jalen Polk, who's a second-round pick, who, in my opinion, will be back. Can you depend on him to be a significant contributor for you? No, you can't. But you can't look at him and say, but what if we just give him a different kind of coaching this year? What if we can start fresh? Guy clearly lost his confidence last year. Let's wipe the slate clean. New staff, new offense. Let's just see what we can squeeze out of this guy. You got 4 players there. Kayshon Boutte, who's actually younger than both Baker and Polk, believe it or not. He showed some promise for you at times, showed some chemistry with Drake May down the field, down the sideline at times. You know, great 5th receiver to have. And that's how many names I just rattled off before I even got to Javon Baker. So, to me, Baker looks like the odd man out in this scenario. You know, barring injury, barring other situations where suddenly you need a player at that position. I'm not saying he's going to get released tomorrow, but you can only have so many guys in uniform on a week-to-week basis at that spot, and I still think they should be adding someone else. And I don't believe that adding Stefon Diggs is going to take them out of the running for a Travis Hunter or any other kind of receiver in this year's draft that they think would be able to help them. So maybe there ends up, at the end of the day, being 2 wideouts that are the odd men out in this scenario. But I like what Diggs does in terms of slotting these guys into more appropriate roles for 2025 and maybe beyond. Who knows? Smart signing. Isn't it overpay? Yes. But you have to throw money around in order to upgrade your roster. And they were able to do that this week at a premium position. It shouldn't stop there. But you can help your quarterback. You can help your receiver room. You can help give your locker room a little more edge, a little more fire, a little more urgency in terms of competitiveness. All reasons why I think this was a really smart signing by the New England Patriots. Really quick, a couple of draft items for you before we get to our conversation with John Lyons. Will Campbell, friends. Will Campbell showing up at LSU's Pro Day on Wednesday with longer arms than he had at the Indianapolis Combine. How does that happen? Home cooking, you might say? Well, no. People doing the measuring at these pro days, and this is standard across pro days, is not done by school employees. You can't even have the illusion of chicanery at these things. The league cares about these measurements. There's a reason why all these people show up to these things and take notes and care about things like arm length and height and weight and 40 times and everything else. But he had 33-inch arms at his pro day versus just 32 5/8 at the combine. And this gets back to something we've said on this podcast that I've written about, that we've talked about on our television shows, is that league people will tell you everyone measured a little shorter than they had previously in Indy. And it has people all sorts of up in arms now, no pun intended, because there are these discrepancies between the numbers we got from the combine and the numbers we're getting now at these pro days. But I'm just telling you, this is not a surprise to people in the league. What was surprising was in Indy, because all of these teams, for especially the top end prospects, the guys that were considered draftable well before this past college season was even played, teams and their scouts, they have measurements on these guys already. So in Will Campbell's case, teams had him on the books before the combine as a 32 7/8 arm length. Just a shade under 33, which is the artificial, but that has become kind of the low-end threshold that teams are looking for guys that play tackle. Even though we've seen players with less than that have some success. Bernard Ryman and Braden Smith, the two starting tackles in Indy, both of whom good players. Ryman just ranked inside the top 10 for Pro Football Focus in terms of their tackle rankings in 2024. Both of them measured shorter than 33 inches at the combine years ago. Ryman, you'll remember, was a prototypical Patriot out of Minnesota, excellent athlete, short arms, but the demeanor, the personality, the work ethic, et cetera, sound familiar? It's Will Campbell. Now, Ryman wasn't a top 5 pick, but in a draft that is relatively weak in terms of the overall talent, relatively weak in terms of the talent, especially at premium positions, is Will Campbell worthy of being taken in the top 5? I think he is. If you read my story with Dante Scarnecchia on tackles and arm length and how important it is, it's not a non-factor, according to Scar. But it shouldn't be the factor. It shouldn't be the determining factor as to whether or not you see a player as having a bright NFL future or not at tackle. If you thought after over 2,500 snaps at left tackle in the SEC, which is what Will Campbell had over 3 years, if you thought he was a high-end pick and a left tackle in the NFL after watching those 2,600 or so snaps, and then he measures with something less than 33 inches and you suddenly say no, that to me is faulty process, friends. And I know what the numbers say, and I know how rare it is for a player to do it, but I just gave you 2 names of guys that are in the NFL right now with sub-33-inch arms that are doing it and making it happen. So we'll talk about this, I'm sure, all the way through draft weekend, especially if the Patriots end up taking Will Campbell. But he measured at 33 inches at the combine. To me, you're talking 3/8 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch if he's truly 32 7/8, which again is what teams had previously on him. To me, that shouldn't impact your decision one way or another because we're talking about this much in terms of space, in terms of length. You're talking about, less than a fingernail. If you don't think the guy's a good player, you don't think he's a good player. Don't blame it on the arm length. Watch him play and go off of that. I understand having thresholds and why all that stuff is important and why teams do it. I do. I get it. But let's root ourselves in reality and try to understand what we're thinking about, as opposed to just seeing a number on a screen or on a piece of paper and saying either yes or no. That's one item, one draft item. The Patriots, by the way, according to our buddy, friend of the podcast, ESPN's Jordan Reed, Will Campbell already had his 30 visit with the Patriots. And I could tell you he has fans in the building. The demeanor, the character, the interview process, he is really knocked it out of the park when it comes to making an impression on folks prior to the draft. Now, one other 30 visit that I want to mention here. This is according to Justin Mello of the Draft Network. Excellent draft coverage on Twitter. He's at JustinM_NFL. If you don't follow him, you should be following him right now. He's reporting that the Patriots also have a 30 visit on the books with Kansas State corner Jacob Parrish. 5'10", 191. So you could say maybe the build of a slot corner. I wouldn't pigeonhole him in that way necessarily. I would allow him to play all over because I think he showed at the college level that he's deserving of that chance, and certainly his athleticism, would indicate that he is deserving of that kind of chance to thrive, whether it's outside or inside. Because listen to some of these numbers. 40-yard dash, 4.35. A 37.5-inch vertical. A 10'9" broad jump. And all kinds of on-the-ball production. 21 pass breakups and 5 picks over the course of the last 2 seasons. He is physical. He's a man-to-man guy. He has that demeanor. He has that kind of edge that I think would play, especially in this defense. You're going to hear John and I talk about just how man-heavy we think this defense will be moving forward. But to me, a really interesting fit as a potential super sub for either Carlton Davis or Christian Gonzalez on the outside, somebody you could play inside now that you've lost, Jonathan Jones to Washington via free agency. You, of course, still have Marcus Jones, and to me, he's the front runner for that gig, but you can never have enough corners. You can never have enough cover people. And Jacob Parrish, to me, is a really intriguing, I would say, day 2 kind of name at that position that we should be keeping an eye on, especially since, again, according to Justin Mello, he has a 30 visit with New England. All right. Without further ado, let's get to our conversation with John Lyons. We're getting to Stefon Diggs. We're getting to our top 5 most productive, most impactful Patriots free agents for the 2025 season. I think you're going to find that conversation to be a lot of fun. Here it is. All right, there he is. There's our guy, John Lyons. John, thanks so much for being with us here on Next Pats. I have to ask you just right off the top, your initial reaction to the Patriots adding Stefon Diggs.
Well, Phil, thanks for having me on. And my initial reaction is, for the first time, probably since Julian Edelman in 2020, but really since Rob Gronkowski in 2018, the Patriots have a guy that an opposing defense has to game plan around when it comes to the passing game. It's been a while, and they finally have that guy. And look, the injury concerns are there, and we're going to get into that in a second. But there is a lot to like about this Stefon Diggs signings. And I know, look, he gets hurt 8 games in, 47 catches, 496 yards, 3 touchdowns at that point, on pace for 1,000 yards. On the surface, it looks pretty good. I think if you look a little deeper, though, he had 1.84 yards per route run last year. That would have been the best of any Patriots wide receiver last year. And again, only 8 games in that year. The amount of targets he had, 62, that would have been the 4th most on the Patriots for the whole season. So this is a guy that volume receiving wise, and also just his effectiveness. And I like that he splits between the outside and the slot quite a bit. His snaps last year, almost 50-50 slot and outside. So there's a lot to like there from that. It's, again, a guy that an opposing defense has to game plan around. It's a guy that walks into the receiver room. He's not only immediately the best player in that room, I think you look around, he's probably the most respected player in that room. And Kendrick Bourne has an argument for that as well. But there is the injury concern, because all these nice things I'm saying, if you don't see those things till Columbus Day, then it sets you back a little bit. But there are some reports out there. Maybe you'll see him week 1 or before then.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see when he's actually ready. I almost to the day, John, a year before Stefon Diggs tore his ACL, Kendrick Bourne tore his ACL. And we didn't see him till week 5 last year. So I'm not saying every ACL tear is created equal and that Diggs, we shouldn't even count on him the first month of the season. But I just would say that that has to exist within the realm of possibilities that we're talking about when we talk about Diggs and when he'll eventually make an impact for the Patriots. And even if he is in uniform week 1, when does he finally feel like himself? So those are all questions that are still TBD in terms of how they'll be answered. But I really like the signing. I just think it's smart for the Patriots to steal their word, to pivot. This guy was not their first choice when it came to adding a top flight receiver. They were all over Chris Godwin. They did everything they could to try to pry him from Tampa Bay. They couldn't do it. They were interested in DK Metcalf. They didn't ultimately even offer the Seahawks a trade, but that wasn't because they weren't interested. It was because they knew and they'd gotten indications that DK Metcalf didn't want to sign a long-term extension with the Patriots, so why are you going to part with a second-round pick in order to acquire a guy that's not only going to be with you for 1 year? So they had money to play with. We know they've got cash to burn. It's a burn in a hole in their pocket, John. Tommy Carr and our guy did a story recently on their spending. They have to spend just to get to, cap floor levels. They're not in danger of not meeting those, but they have to spend this money on someone. And so it's why you see overpays. They go above and beyond to get Milton Williams. They're going above and beyond to get Stefon Diggs, $26 million guaranteed. Who knows how much of the rest of the $69 million that was reported is actually real money, but $26 million guaranteed for a guy who's going to be 32 in November coming off a torn ACL. That is eyebrows through the roof kind of money when you see that get reported. Now, you say the defenses are going to have to prepare for him, and I agree with you. But do you think he's a number one at this stage of his career? Because the Patriots, all offseason, we've been talking about it. They need a one. They need a one. They need a one. Is this a one?
So, and it's interesting, too, because even last year on Houston, you could make the case he was the 2 or even the 3 if you include Nico Collins and Tank Dell there. I mean, you can maybe take him over Tank Dell. There's an argument there. But I think, look, the way I always try to evaluate this is if they were playing in a great offense, where would they slot? And I think Stefon Diggs in a truly great offense would probably be your second option or a 1B type player. And just like Demario Douglas would be your third or fourth option, and right now he's probably your second option. And you could say the same thing about Matt Collins and Kendrick Bourne. They're probably fourth options in a really good offense, but they're in that argument for 2 or 3. And I'm not discounting Hunter Henry in this, right? Because I know it's a different position, but they're all involved in the pass game. So I still think right now Stefon Diggs is your number one. But I think, again, if you are in a truly great offense, he's probably your second option in the passing game. Hunter Henry's your third. Demario Douglas is your fourth. And then Kendrick Bourne, Matt Collins are that 4B5 type guy. But I think it just speaks to the dearth of talent they have in the receiver group and have had for really since Julian Edelman got hurt and retired was the last time you, and I know Kendrick Bourne had 800 yards receiving in 2021. I get it, but still, that was, I think, a large factor of a good cast around him and Josh McDaniels being there, in his prime as OC, who, by the way, that's a factor too, that he's back. But yeah, to me, I look at Diggs as your number one in a truly great offense, maybe a 1B to 2 type player, much like he was last year in Houston.
Right. Yeah, I see him the same way. I would not stop pursuing offensive talent here. I heard from one
No, I wouldn't either.
AFC executive today saying, yeah, they still need juice at that position. They don't have anybody right now who's stretching the field for them. And I know, that maybe can get a little bit overrated. You just throw a track guy out there and he runs down the sideline. I mean, they had a fast guy in Tyquan Thornton. In theory, he should have been able to stretch the field, right? Didn't help them stretch the field all that much in his short tenure here. So you have to be careful about, what kinds of options you're considering when you want to add that type of skill set. But they don't have that number one still right now. And I think, honestly, John, if you can get Stefon Diggs into that number 2 role, and it's clear not only to you as a team, but to him as an individual that he's not the guy in the receiver room, I think that can help you get the best version of Stefon Diggs too. And it's an interesting conversation because on the one hand, I love his competitive spirit. I think the Patriots in general, and the receiver room in particular, need more of that. They need more dog, if you want to use that cliche. They need more alpha types of personalities in there. I think that's a good thing for them. On the other hand, I do think you have to be careful. I heard from one person last night saying, the competitiveness, that fiery competitor that he is, that can get in the way at times of what you want to do as a football team, big picture, when you're trying to, especially now as Mike Vrabel and his staff, establish a culture and set a foundation for what you want to be long term. You'd just rather have that and be towards that end of the spectrum and ask him to dial it down rather than the other way around and just be coaxing these guys. Hey, can you do a little bit more extra? Can you be more of a professional? Can you hone your craft a little bit further here, because we need that out of you? You don't have to ask Stefon Diggs to do those types of things. But he's a personality, John. He is. Do you worry about that at all, especially if they can't add to the room, if they don't add a Travis Hunter or they don't add another really talented guy that would be the clear number one, that, you know, there could be some frustration that at times boils over and maybe in some ways impedes the progress of your young quarterback?
So I'm not as worried about that for a couple reasons. One, if they don't add anybody else, he's going to get a lot of targets, right? Because
Right.
they don't have anyone else. But even if they do, and I think the signing of Diggs is kind of a signal to me that I wouldn't expect Travis Hunter to be the guy at 4. I think him and the Carlton Davis signing kind of play into that, and we can get into that more later. But I think is he going to play the Algie Crumpler to Rob Gronkowski role in 2010, that mentorship? Maybe not quite that far, but I think he's going to walk in and he's going to show Jalen Polk and Demario Douglas and maybe Javon Baker, if he ends up making the team, what it takes to be a high-end professional, which those guys haven't really had someone like that around. I know Kendrick Bourne's been here, but he's been injured in and out of the lineup. So I think that can help. As far as him complaining, like I said, if he's the only guy here at that level, he's going to get a bunch of targets. But even if not, this is where I think Mike Vrabel and Josh McDaniels come into play. I mean, you hired Mike Vrabel after 1 year of Gerard Mayo because you thought he was the best coaching candidate available and he was going to totally reset your culture. Well, if you have a strong enough culture, you can deal with 1 or 2 or 3 guys that maybe go overboard a little. And we saw it for 20 years here in New England. Obviously, they had Brady and Bill. I get it. But they had a great culture, so they could deal with maybe some guys that would push the boundaries a little. I mean, look at the difference of Corey Dillon in Cincinnati to New England, right? And maybe Stefon Diggs comes in with Josh McDaniels and with Mike Vrabel, and there's a difference. I mean, Josh McDaniels is already, excuse me, the best offensive coordinator Stefon Diggs has played for. No disrespect to Joe Brady, but it's the best OC he's played for. I think that in itself makes a difference.
Yeah, and I look at this team as being in a different spot than the one that added guys like Dillon, right? Like if you're a championship level team and you needed one guy to really round out your roster and take you over the edge to be a championship caliber club, that's one thing. You're in a different spot now. And Drake May is, he still is in his second year, and he did not do a ton of winning last year, as promising as he is. And I've been as big a fan of his as anyone since last year around this time. I do understand if the team was in some ways somewhat tentative about bringing in someone like that, just because you'd love to have the talent without the, oh my God, it was 3rd and 8 and I threw to Austin Hooper instead of Stefon Diggs, and am I about to get an earful on the sidelines here? You just, if you can avoid it, ideally you'd avoid it, but they are so desperate for talent at that position. They're so desperate for, I would say, professionalism at that position. And maybe people look, hear that word and they say, well, isn't this guy like, a loudmouth and like a diva? Well, he has in the past, he has shown the tendency to do those things, yes, at times, but he could play, and he is a technician. He is a savvy route runner, and you don't become one of the most productive receivers that's been in the league over the course of the last decade, John, without taking your job seriously. And the Patriots need more guys like that who are wired that way. I wanted to, before we move off the Diggs topic, because I want to get to your thoughts on just the Patriots spending in general, especially after this move, but also, some of our rankings. I think it'll be fun to rank Patriots free agents and which guys we think will be most productive or most impactful in 2025. But I'm curious, you say you think this is a little bit of an indication as to what they might do in the draft. I love the idea of Travis Hunter and Stefon Diggs. Again, I think that kind of clearly slots guys into the right roles. Hunter would be your 1. As a receiver, I like him as a receiver. I don't know if you like him as a receiver. He'd be your 1. Diggs would be your 2. Everybody else can fall in line after that. I think even Diggs would look at somebody like Hunter, even though he's a rookie, he hasn't done anything in the league. He would say, okay, this kid just won a Heisman. I'm 32 coming off an injury. I think he might even relish the opportunity, John, to kind of mentor somebody like that who has, in some ways, in terms of physical skill set, some similarities to Diggs. And he had a reputation even in Houston last year of, mentoring John Mechie, Tank Dell, some of these younger receivers there. So I think he would do that. But it sounds like you think they might not be into the idea of Travis Hunter after making this move. Why?
And to your point, too, I mean, Diggs kind of did walk into Houston as the number 2 behind Nico Collins, and he knew that going in. I just think you look at, let's start, and I think Hunter is better as a corner than a receiver. Not that he can't be a good receiver. I think he's going to be a great pro either way. But you have Christian Gonzalez, who is an all-pro player, young. He's going to require a massive contract extension within the next couple of years. You just committed a bunch of money to Carlton Davis, who is still in his 20s, going to be here at least those 3 years, maybe more. You have Marcus Jones in the slot. I know the slot corner position isn't as solidified, but that's another young player there. So I look at that cornerback depth chart. He's not going to play over Gonzalez. I don't know if he'd come in and play over Davis right away. And you're going to spend the 4th overall pick on a slot corner? Like, I don't think so. So then you look at offensively. Look, would he come in and be the most talented or second most talented behind Diggs in your receiver room? Yeah, he would be. But you're sitting here now and you've invested on all 3 levels of defense and free agency. You've invested at right tackle. But other than that, you haven't invested on offense. And you're looking at the left side of your offensive line, not just left tackle. You don't know who your left guard's going to be. I mean, maybe it'll be Cole Strange. Maybe it'll be Layden Robinson. Maybe it'll even be Sidney So, who played a couple years ago and not last year. I don't know. And then left tackle, I mean, the last time, Phil, they had, and this should cover the team, last time they had consistently high-level left tackle play was Trent Brown in 2018, not Trent Brown in 2023. So it's been a while. And I think if you have an opportunity at number 4 to get an Abdul Carter or to take a left tackle or trade down and get a left tackle, I think for this organization where they're at, it's more value than if you take Travis Hunter. And don't get me wrong, I think he's going to be a great pro. But I think it's also kind of a fallacy to think that if you don't take Travis Hunter at 4, whoever else you take isn't going to be a great pro. Like, you have the 4th overall pick. If you take Abdul Carter, he's going to be a great pro too. If you trade down and at pick 11, you take Calvin Banks, he can be a starter at left tackle for a long time, and that's extremely valuable. So, I mean, I'm not totally out on Hunter. I just think with the money and previous draft capital at corner, and with now that huge hole on the entire left side of the O-line, I don't see Hunter as likely after last night.
It's a totally fair point when you say they can still get a very good player not named Travis Hunter at number 4. Yeah. My thinking is if either Hunter or Carter, say Hunter and Carter, and that's very unlikely to happen, but say they have their choice between those 2 guys, could you play a game tomorrow and feel pretty good about your defense? I think you could. Yeah. With the 2 corners that you have, and maybe you don't have that premier pass rusher coming off the edge, which Abdul Carter would be for you. Offensively, I still think you're 2 starters away from being even in the pretty good conversation. And one's at receiver and one's a tackle. And so I, like you, I would say, like, look at the offense and definitely look at the offensive line. And I've been a proponent of, if both Carter and Hunter are gone, say Shedeur Sanders doesn't get taken in the top 3, go ahead and take Will Campbell at 4 overall. Arm length be damned. I'm okay with having shorter arms to take a guy who's an elite athlete who played left tackle in the SEC for 3 years and at a really high level. So they can not take Hunter and still come away from that top 5 pick feeling really good about themselves. I just wouldn't ignore the spot, and I don't know if you're getting that legit number 1 that you need anywhere else in this year's draft. I know we've seen it in the past. Guys get taken in the second round, and maybe it could happen again this year. It just feels like that high-end talent is lacking in this year's class. Let's get to the spending, because I know you have a little bit of a take here when it comes to Patriots spending, John. Should this move, $26 million for a 32-year-old coming off an ACL surgery, shift people's opinions as to whether or not Patriots ownership is willing to spend at the requisite level to get to where they want to be? Because, again, to bring up our guy, Tommy Curran, he wrote earlier this week that, if you actually look at the cap dollars that have been available to them and what they've spent in terms of cash, they're bumping up right close to being dollar for dollar there. Now, we talked about it a little bit earlier today on the Patriots Talk podcast when we recorded. If you look at their spending relative to the rest of the league, the picture isn't quite as pretty. But Tom's logic is, well, you can't encourage people to come here in free agency, i.e. Ronnie Stanley, Chris Godwin, etc., because you're not good enough to coax them out of the places where they are already, and you're not drafting well enough to pay your own guys to get to this, league average in terms of cash spending over the last few years. So where do you stand on this? Is this an unwillingness to spend on ownership's part, or is it a lack of opportunity because people either A, won't take your money, or B, you're drafting so poorly you have nobody to, with a straight face, give the gobs of money that are at your disposal to? What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah. So I got to give you and Tom credit because you've tried to do something that hasn't usually existed in this discussion, and that's add some nuance to it, right, and some context. Look, I think if the Patriots could win and spend $50 million a year, the Crafts would happily do that, and they'd be all set. But I think it hasn't been as much an unwillingness to spend as they haven't really had the guys worthy of re-signing. I mean, Phil, you know the last time the Patriots re-signed a first-round draft pick to a second contract?
Oh.
It was Donta Hightower in 2012.
Gosh, I had
That's
it.
the
It was
last
on the tip
time.
of my tongue.
I mean, and you can go through the list. In 2013, they didn't have a first-round pick, but since then, Malcolm Brown, Dominique Easley, Sony Michel, Isaiah Wynn, N'Keal Harry, Mac Jones, right? We can go through the entire. None of those guys were worth a second contract. None of them got a second contract. Look at the second round. Cyrus Jones didn't get a second-round contract. Duke Dawson didn't. And those guys weren't worth it. And we've seen in recent years.
Jawan Williams,
Kyle Duggar
Taekwon
did.
Thornton. It's a
There
mess.
you go, right?
Yeah.
Like Cole Strange probably won't get a second contract. And if you go back, though, when they actually drafted well at the top of the draft, Richard Seymour got multiple contracts. So did Ty Warren. So did Logan Mankins set the record for money for a guard when he got his second contract with the Patriots. Devin McCourty and Rob Gronkowski got second contracts. So they've shown when they've drafted well that they will give guys second contracts, in some limited cases, third contracts as well. Their issue is they just haven't done it now. Did they screw up and were they too cheap with Joe Thuney? You bet. Were they too cheap with DeAndre Hopkins a couple of years ago? 100%. But I think a lot of this has to go to they haven't had the guys worth re-signing. Now, I'm not absolving them for building a lighthouse instead of a family room right at Gillette Stadium on that NFLPA report card. They're probably 5 years too late with that new facility that they announced this past fall, and the facility looks beautiful. That's going to be expensive. They should have done it in 2019 or 2020, right? So I'm not absolving them for that, and I think those are areas you can criticize them for being too cheap. But I think a lot of this, the original sin, if you will, they have not drafted well enough at the top of the. I mean, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo would have got a second contract, but that was the whole thing. They had to trade him because of Brady anyway. So it's just, I think that it hasn't been as much an unwillingness as they just haven't had the quality of guys to keep around with, again, some mistakes mixed in like Joe Thuney.
It's really amazing. I mean, even to get to where they are in terms of their cash spending, they had to give contracts to all of these guys last offseason. Ramondre Stevenson, Kyle Duggar, Christian Barmore, Devon Godchaux got a new deal.
Anthony Jennings.
And almost all of them, maybe Jennings aside, but almost all of the guys that they extended, re-signed, John, almost all of them ended up declining in terms of their performance.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they can't rebound this year and moving forward. But boy, it's kind of mind-blowing based on the players they gave the money to and what they got out of those guys this past year. Just what a lack of impact and lack of production they really received from those guys. So those deals aren't looking much better now than they did when they initially gave them out.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. One thing I think to add is now they're finally on track with Gonzalez and May to have guys worthy of second contracts. So if in a couple of years they cheap out on those guys, then that's a real criticism. But if not, I think just so much of this is they haven't had the quality of guys.
Okay, yeah, there's no they absolutely cannot. Let's say it right now, March 26, 2025. If they don't re-sign both Christian Gonzalez and Drake May, barring a unexpected, let's say this, almost Baker Mayfieldian post-rookie year decline from Drake May, boy, those guys have to be part of your foundation moving forward, because if they're not, then I don't know what you have. Let's get to our rankings, because this will be fun. We want to do a top 5, and I think our answers might be a little bit different here. So I think this could get interesting, John. Top 5 Patriots free agent acquisitions in terms of impact, productivity, however you want to rank them. And I think we should go 5 to 1. I think we should go backwards. Because let's build a little suspense. Why don't we? And so I want you to hit me with your number 5 to start.
So number 5 for me is Robert Spillane, linebacker, 29 years old, started 17 games last year, excellent run defender, plays downhill, and we saw it firsthand. As soon as Jawan Bentley got hurt last year, their linebacker play went through the floor. And I also think, look, coaching left some things to be desired on the defensive side of the ball last year. But you saw, Jelani Tavai regressed. I know they just matched the offer sheet for Ellis, but that's more of a special teams type player to me than it is a true defensive starter. So they just haven't had the guys in the middle of that defense that were good enough, really outside of Bentley, for quite some time. So he's a guy that you can pair with Bentley on running downs. You can rotate next to Tavai. You can do, you get a little bit creative at their linebacker level, but I just think you now have a guy that's a legit talent, downhill player, really good run defender. And Phil, 18 straight runs the Jaguars against the Jaguars in London, a 19-play drive against the Colts plus a 2-point conversion to lose. That's not going to happen with Robert Spillane in the middle of your defense. I'm not sitting here telling you he's going to walk in and be the reincarnation of Teddy Bruschi in the middle, but he's going to be a big upgrade there in the middle, and I'm happy they brought him in.
And I think he could be, John, based on what I've heard from people who knew him in Vegas. He could be a captain in year 1, just based on his familiarity with Vrabel and the defense and just the leadership that he apparently is going to exude. I can't pretend to know the guy, and I've never seen him, interact with others in a locker room setting, but he is, by all accounts, a next-level football character kind of individual. So for all the reasons you mentioned in terms of the on-field production, I don't think either of us would be stunned if in 2025 he led the team in tackles, right? He's that kind of player. He's just going to be in the middle of everything. Defensively, he's a little bit different kind of linebacker than the Patriots have had in the past under Bill Belichick and then Gerard Mayo. So you're going to get, you would think, a little bit more in terms of coverage and running with backs and tight ends in the passing game, and maybe he's able to get his hands on the football, a handful of occasions this coming year. So he is actually my 5 as well. But I do want to give a player a shout out here just to keep it a little bit spicy, and I don't want people to forget about this guy. My honorable mention, my 5B, if you will, is going to be Austin Hooper. Austin Hooper, John, was 4th in the team in targets last year. He was 4th on the team in receptions, and yes, that speaks to the abomination of a receiver room they had last year, but he was right there with Hunter Henry. It felt like Mr. Dependable for Drake May, and, just not a game-breaking type of option, but there when you needed him, and it wouldn't stun me if Josh McDaniels wants to use, he had Hooper in Vegas, he wants to use both Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper on the field quite a bit, and they are a heavy 12 personnel kind of team. If that's the case, I think he's technically a free agent signing. He did, get to free agency, and they had to bring him back. I think he could end up being a pretty impactful player for their passing game moving forward. So he's my 5A right after Spillane. Who you have at number 4?
So 4, and it's for the reasons we kind of talked about earlier, Stefon Diggs, right? Premium position, wide receiver, really good player. The reason I don't have him higher on the list is we might not see him till week 5, right? If we were seeing him in week 1, I'd probably have him at 2, maybe 3. But just because of that injury, I put him a little bit lower at 4. But I am expecting maybe not 1,000 yards from Steph Diggs, but I'm expecting 750, 800-ish yards. And if he plays a full year, knocking on that 1,000-yard door. Just, again, the injury for me is why he's not higher on my list.
I love this. This is going to be our first wild discrepancy, and I'm not going to tell you where Diggs is on my list, but he's not number 4. I have Carlton Davis at number 4. And listen, this is a guy who's missed time himself. Shouldn't be at the beginning of the year, but over the course of the last few years, he's good for 3, 4, 5 maybe missed football games. And he is somebody, though, that you're going to expect to be on the field, play in, play out. I think he is going to be a tone setter in some ways, as much as you can be at that cornerback position for what I'm anticipating will be a man-heavy scheme with Christian Gonzalez on one side and Carlton Davis on the other. And, boy, he's going to have chances John, to make plays on the football, because teams, I think, are just going to want to stay away from Christian Gonzalez. Not, necessarily every snap of every game on a week-to-week basis. I don't think he's quite, Revis Island just yet. I don't think that's his reputation just yet. But if you had your choice, you'd probably rather go to the guy that Carlton Davis is covering versus the other side. And so I think he'll make a significant impact, but I do think he'll miss some time, and he ends up being number 4 on my list. I'm going to throw you number 3 right now for me, and it's Milton Williams. And that might seem surprising based on the fact that he was really their headliner in free agency this year. I just look at Milton Williams, and I think he's going to be an impactful and a productive player for them. He's a defensive tackle who is going to be, unless Christian Barmore's also out there, and this is a huge X factor to me. If Barmore was out there, I think Milton Williams would be one for me, John, quite frankly. I think he would be in that conversation. But he's a guy who, though we believe will play more in New England, that's been every indication from Mike Vrabel and even from Williams himself, is that he's going to be on the field more than he was in Philly, but he's somebody who hasn't, cracked 50% of the snaps during his time with the Eagles. And so even if he is disruptive on third downs, what's he doing for you on first and second down? And how many of those third downs do you want him playing, depending on, how long that Patriots defense is even on the field? So I do think he's going to be impactful, and I like the signing. I like that they extended themselves to make sure they brought him in when he was, looking like he was going to sign with Carolina, and I really like him as a player. I just wonder what his impact will be on early downs. I wonder how much he'll be able to play and sustain that level that he showed in Philadelphia if he's being asked to do more. So he comes in at number 3 for me.
So for me at 3, and you made some good points on Milton Williams, it's Morgan Moses at right tackle for a couple of reasons. The things that, we talked about with Stefon Diggs before, like being a professional, showing some of those other guys in the room what it takes. Morgan Moses epitomizes that. I mean, this dude's played over 1,000 snaps 5 times in his career. He will solidify the right tackle position. And look, he's an average player probably at right tackle. However, you've had a lot worse than average at right tackle over the past few years. I mean, remember when Connor McDermott came in and just was there, and that was like an upgrade at the time? I think it was
Thank God for Connor McDermott, I believe was the quote from Bill Belichick. What would we do without Connor McDermott? It was something along those lines.
Exactly. So, and I think it also allows you, you're probably going to have Bradbury at center, Mike Onwenu at right guard, Moses at right tackle at 6'6", 320. Now you have some legit power football on the right side of your offensive line. And you have Ramondre Stevenson, who's a power back. They may add to that running back room later in the draft as well. But they're going to be able to run the football to that right side, and that's going to be really valuable, obviously, the way Josh McDaniels wants to call it, but for Drake May as well. And I just think now, at the very least, Drake May can walk up to the offensive line before a passing play and know, hey, the right side of my offensive line can hold their own. They may not be elite, but they can hold their own. And I think, again, for him, just to solidify that position with a guy who, from all indications, has excellent leadership traits and professionalism, that's why, to me, he's 3rd on the list.
Yeah, and he's my 2, John, because if you don't have someone there, or you have what the Patriots had there last year, it can make your offense unwatchable. I know right tackle isn't considered as valuable as left tackle, but God, is it critical. And to have somebody that you think, based on his history, and I know he's getting up there in terms of age, but he has been, Mr. Steady Eddie over the course of the last, better part of the last decade, when it comes to just his availability and his toughness and his professionalism. And even if he's not an all-pro level player, to be out there, again, to make good on my ranking, my number 2 ranking here, which I'm sure he really cares about, he's going to have to be out there all the time. It's a premium position, both left tackle and right tackle. And just to give you an idea of why right tackle matters just about as much as left tackle, John, here are the pass rushers who play over 50% of the snaps on the right offensive side. I want to make sure I get this right here. Okay. Because right at the top of the list is TJ Watt. TJ Watt doesn't move off of the offensive right. He's only going against right tackles. But Cam Jordan, Nolan Smith, George Karlaftis, Max Crosby, Montez Sweat. I mean, you're talking about some of the best pass rushers Micah Parsons, 67% on the right side. So, like, you're not seeing lesser talent because you are the right tackle and you're thought of as like this run blocking type of player, and it's the left tackle who has to do all the pass blocking. No, you're seeing some of the best players, if not the best pass rushers in football, coming off your side. And if he can give you representative play there, that to me is worth even a little bit more than the splash plays that I think you'll get from Milton Williams. Now, maybe Milton Williams will look like Aaron Donald in 2025, John, and my argument will be blown to smithereens. But that's why I have Moses ahead of Milton Williams. Are you up to number 2? Have you given me your 2 yet?
I am.
Okay.
I'm about to. All right. So 2 for me, Carlton Davis, right? 28 years old. He's going to be a lockdown corner across from Christian Gonzalez. And there's a couple things I like about him. One, he will come downhill in the run game, which just as a former coach, I love that stuff. But it's also really valuable to have at corner because how many corners out there don't want to play in the run game, and opponents know that and they go at him. Not the case with Carlton Davis. But more importantly, week in and week out last year, Detroit played by percentage-wise the most man coverage in the NFL. Mm-hmm. So now you're sitting here with a great man coverage. And by the way, Davis was really damn good at it too. You're sitting there with a great man coverage corner at 6'1", 206, good length, can press, opposite Gonzalez. And I know, as you mentioned, he's coming off an injury. The injury's a broken jaw, though. And look, I'm not minimizing a broken jaw, but it's not like he tore his ACL and it's going to affect his movement, or he messed up his hip and it's going to affect his movement, or it messed up his shoulder and it's going to affect his tackling or his press technique, right? It's something he can recover from and give you the same amount of production that he gave for Detroit last year. I also like this dude won a Super Bowl with Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. Like, he knows what it takes to be a winner at a high level. And by the way, in a new situation, right? Brady came to that team. A lot of new guys came to that team, and they won pretty quickly. Not that I'm predicting a Super Bowl here, but he knows to go into a new situation and win really quickly. And I think this has the potential, Phil, to be the best group of corners they've had since 2019, when Stefon Gilmore won Defensive Player of the Year, and they had J.C. Jackson and Jason McCourty. Now, they're not going to have 2019 Stefon Gilmore, but I think since then, this will be the best group of corners, and I think it has the potential to be one of the best, if not the best, tandem of corners in the NFL.
I agree with you. I really do. And to me, it's as much about the talent as it is about the fit with the scheme we think we will see, right? From Terrell Williams and Mike Vrabel to be as man-heavy as I think they'll be, and to have these two guys is going to be a lot of fun to watch. And just to give you an idea of just how good Carlton Davis has been in man coverage, a great stat from Next Gen Stats soon after Carlton Davis signed with the Patriots, he allowed just a 45.2 completion percentage in man coverage last season, which was 4th lowest among NFL cornerbacks with at least 30 targets sent in their direction. So he is still a high-level player in the right situation, and this feels like the right situation. He doesn't have to be the number one. He's going to get to play a lot of man coverage. He's going to be allowed to be physical, both in the run game, but I would assume in coverage as well. They're going to be at the line of scrimmage, John. They're going to be in guys' faces, and they're going to try to reroute them as soon as that football is snapped. And I just think you could see, as long as he's on the field, you could see as good a Carlton Davis as you've seen in a long time, just because of the fit for him. So I really do. And I'm sure we'll be able to revisit these rankings, and maybe I'll end up looking low on Carlton Davis, but it just goes to show, I think some of the discrepancy in our rankings just goes to show like how well I think both you and I feel as though the Patriots did do with the guys that they were able to sign. Did they miss on receivers? 100%. But the guys that they were able to acquire in Moses, in terms of dependability, and Williams in terms of some of that splashy playmaking that I think you need, Davis in terms of the scheme fit, like, they did a good job in terms of finding guys that look like the right guys at the right time for them. Now, my number one is Stefon Diggs, though. It's Stefon. I know he's your number 4, and I understand the injury concerns. I have him here, John, even if we don't see him for a few weeks in the regular season, because you were just so starved for talent offensively, and especially in that receiver room, that I think that the difference he will make with him versus without him will be so significant just across the board in their ability to be productive offensively. I'm talking impact on Drake May in critical situations. I'm talking maybe even impact on your run game in terms of maybe loosening up some defenses. I know he's not the deep threat that he was at one point in time where you've got to feel like you've got a safety with extra eyes going in his direction on every snap, but they couldn't throw the ball, John, especially outside the numbers, it felt like, for weeks on end with a talented quarterback, with a guy that should be able to do just about anything you want him to do in terms of being a passer. And I think he could help loosen things up for them offensively and not open things up to the point where they're suddenly a top 10 offense, but just give you some dependability outside of Hunter Henry when it's 3rd and 7 and everybody in the stadium knows you're dropping back to pass. I think he could be a chain mover for you. He had as many first downs. I found this stat to be, on the one hand, fascinating, John, on the other hand, embarrassing for last year's offense. He had as many first downs in 8 games last year as the Patriots' leader in first downs in that receiver room last year had in 17 games. It was Pop Douglas. They both had 31 first downs.
31, right?
Which is unbelievable.
Would have been second on the team overall.
So, to get that guy, and if he gets anywhere close to that form that he showed pre-injury last year, I think he ends up actually being your most impactful free agent signing.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. And look, if Diggs comes out and he's everything you say he is, maybe he'll end up being my number 1 or 2 by the end of the season. Because I'm not questioning how good the player is. It's just really the injury for me. So I think he makes some, and that first down stat, I saw that early too. It's just 31 first down catches would have been second on the team, and he played 8 games. And he didn't even play a full 8, right? He got hurt during game 8, so 7.5. Geez, I know. Well, for me, my number 1, probably obvious now, it is Milton Williams. And look,
I thought you were going to go with Jack Gibbons. Jack Gibbons? Jack Gibbons.
I considered it. Well, we'll see who they sign at kicker, right? Now that Joey Sly's gone.
That's right,
that'll
Captain Jack Gibbons.
Yeah. And look, am I as excited as I was of, Stefon Gilmore in 2017 or Revis in 2014 or Adalius Thomas in 2007? I'm not quite that level excited, but there is a really lot to like about Milton Williams. First and foremost, he's 26 years old. So you're getting this dude in his prime. You're going to have him, because a lot of these other guys we talk about, Spillane's 29, Davis is 28. That's good, but it's not 26. He's 26. If you like PFF stuff, he was the number 1 rated pass rusher at defensive tackle by PFF. He chose to leave the defending Super Bowl champion to come to your program, which, look, I know the biggest reason he came here was because of the money, but still, I think that's something for the culture, for the locker room, but just from an on-field standpoint. Best pass rushing defensive tackle, arguably, in football, and I know he had some help there in Philadelphia with Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Josh Sweat, all those guys there, Jordan Davis. I get it, but you look at this defensive line. You put him next to Christian Barmore, and then all of a sudden you get Keon White outside, or there might be some downs, which they did towards the end of last year. You put Keon White on the inside. You put Milton Williams on the outside. You have Anthony Jennings or Harold Landry on the other edge. All of a sudden, you got a really good group to get after the quarterback. And this is a team near the bottom of the league in sacks last year, bottom of the league in pressure rate, bottom of the league, too, in takeaways as well. Now, all of a sudden, you have a group that can force pressure, hopefully be better against the run, which I know is not Williams' biggest strength, but hopefully be better against the run, maybe create some turnovers as well. He's the type of guy to me, and I put Davis in this category a little bit, and probably Diggs as well. He can make 2 or 3 plays in a game, which can impact the outcome of a game. And I think that is really a big deal. So look, it's not Stefon Gilmore in 2017, right? I'm not that excited, but this is a really good player who in his prime chose to come to your program. And I think him and Barmore together is going to be a hell of a defensive tackle pass rushing tandem for several years.
Yeah, it's interesting because I agree with every point that you make. And I think it just comes down to if you are ranking these guys the way we are, it's what do you value? And I think in some ways the question with Milton Williams is what is the impact, if that's how we're ranking these guys, what is the impact of, your volume of plays versus the big plays that you do make, right? Because to your point, he might make 1 play in 3 games, John, that wins them the game. A strip sack, even if he plays, say it's 25 plays in a game and he makes 2 tackles, but he also has a strip sack in the 4th quarter. that's more impactful than Morgan Moses playing 78 plays and allowing only, 4 pressures. So it's just I have one guy over the other as we're ranking these right now, but I could totally see in a smaller volume of snaps, Milton Williams making an outsized impact. And it's just one of the reasons why this is a fun discussion to have and why it's a fun free agent class for us to break down, because obviously they had so many holes to fill. They had the opportunity to pluck a bunch of different guys from a bunch of different positions and throw it all into the pot. And now as the season plays out, we'll get to see, what they're able to cook up here. But this was a lot of fun, man. I'm glad we were able to do this. Yeah. I'm glad our rankings were as different as they were, because I think it makes it an even more fun discussion. But it's always fun to pick your brain on football and get all of your takes. Tell our listeners, John, where they can find you and where they can find your work. Because I'm sure especially as this off season continues and we get closer to the draft, and I know you're doing even more than just football for WEEI, people are going to want to hear your voice. So let us know where we can find you.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I appreciate you having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk football with you. Phil's been a great guy to me for many years, for those that don't know. So even if you don't like his takes all the time, he's a good guy. But
there's plenty of people out there who don't like the takes.
Yeah, right. Okay, they
don't need to stand up now. Let's keep those takes on my takes to yourselves, everybody.
So look, you can find me on WEEI. I'm on there most weekends, and of course, I don't just talk Patriots on there. Red Sox, Celtics, Bruins, you name it. I hopefully will be doing some Celtics playoff coverage as well coming up. Hopefully, another run to the finals. You can find me on New England Football Journal. I'm on there Patriots post game every week. Also in the off season, Sundays at 10 a.m. every single Sunday. We do our off season show. You can find me on Twitter at @TheRealJohnLyons. I just made an Instagram like 2 weeks ago. You can find me John Lyons 78 there. So I finally made it to the year 2015 and I made an Instagram. But yeah, WEEI, New England Football Journal, Twitter, Instagram. Always appreciate any follows and interactions.
Unbelievable patience by you with the Instagram creation, because you just wanted to feel it out for like a decade or so and just feel like, is this something I really want to get involved with here? Let's see how this plays out. And now, I don't know. I would say you're buying at the right time. I'm glad you finally made that leap.
2 billion monthly users, I was like, I guess I'll get it.
All right, let's figure out a way to get in on the fun. Well, John, thanks so much for being with us, buddy. Let's do this again soon.
Of course, thank you.
Great stuff there from John. Really appreciate his time. Appreciate you all for spending as much time with us today as you have. If you could, please leave us a comment on YouTube. Love mixing it up in the comment section. We're over 100 comments just about every single episode these days. It's tremendous. People are all kinds of fired up about the draft, fired up about free agency. I'm sure you're fired up about Stefon Diggs as well. Leave us some questions there in the comments on YouTube. Leave us some questions on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a review if you could. 5-star reviews are always welcome. They are what keep our podcast alive, keep it running, allow us to do everything we are able to do from a content standpoint for the foreseeable future. So we appreciate you. Appreciate you for subscribing on YouTube, for hitting that thumbs up button as well. Anytime you can interact with us and interact with this podcast, that helps us continue to do what we do. And it's a nice symbiotic kind of relationship. I don't know what I'm doing with my hands here if you're watching on YouTube, but you know what I mean. You help us. We give you the content that you're looking for, and everybody ends the day very happy. Hopefully you're very happy about the Stefon Diggs sighting. It is at the very least entertaining to think about and should make the Patriots a more watchable product in 2025, which is really what everybody's hoping for, right? All right, thanks again for checking us out this week. Keep an eye out for another edition of Next Pats next week. Make sure you're listening and watching the Patriots Talk podcast as well. Early edition just about every single night at 6 o'clock. We've got all sorts of football news and notes for you. Thanks so much for consuming everything we do at NBCSportsBoston.com. We will talk to you very, very soon.